Boundary crossings and violations can happen in any area of your life. So in this video, we're going to talk about what they are and how to repair them. Hi, my name is JD and I'm a statistician and music therapist here to offer statistically significant support. And if you don't mind hitting those like and subscribe buttons so that you can get the support as it comes out. Now, it almost doesn't matter what it is. A boundary crossing can happen in time and space, money and gifts, and even language and physical contact. So as long as the offended person is upset, you have crossed a boundary. When relationships have clear boundaries, the people in those relationships are empowered and autonomous. They can think and speak for themselves, and they can recognize self-efficacy. In other words, boundaries help us be unique and independent. For example, being more informed about sex, how it affects us mentally, and recognizing boundaries helps us prevent sexual abuse, sexual coercion, and sexual bullying. But couples with more boundary crossings tend to be less satisfied in their relationships. Now, there are different types of boundaries. Boundaries can be diffuse, rigid, or permeable. Diffuse boundaries are weak and lacking containment and structure. Rigid boundaries are fixed and inflexible, and permeable boundaries are flexible and open. Now, diffuse boundaries have the greatest potential to cause harm, and they take you back to old patterns of thinking and defenses. They are an open boundary that can lead to situations like asking children to relay messages between parents. And this can be an old way of thinking, like, I need to get what I want and it doesn't matter how I get it. But rigid boundaries don't allow for growth or change. Now, permeable boundaries do. They are ideal because they allow for change, empowerment, and openness to new experiences. They allow for outside forces to influence them, like when a group welcomes a new member. Now, keep in mind that it's important to respect boundaries. If you've crossed a boundary, that means that something you did, someone considered inappropriate or upsetting. But crossing a boundary happens from time to time, and it may even be necessary. Crossing boundaries can be positive, neutral, or negative, and it can be done without causing the other person harm. Let's give examples of this. If your partner is crossing a boundary, they might share personal details about you to a friend to seek comfort or flirt with another person. But crossing could be as simple as touching someone on the shoulder. Sometimes, however, it's okay to cross a boundary, but you never want to violate a boundary. A crossing can be done ultimately to benefit another person, but violations only break trust and fidelity. With a crossing, you might call an ambulance without someone's permission because they've passed out. But with a violation, you might divulge that they passed out to a friend when you promised that you wouldn't. That's a violation because you're breaking trust in that relationship. So let's talk about some questions to ask before you cross a boundary. The first question you want to ask yourself is, are the rewards greater than the risks? So you want to weigh the risks against the rewards for both crossing and not crossing the boundary. Boundaries should only be crossed when it benefits the other person. The second question you want to ask yourself is, what do other people think about this? So seek honest guidance from someone you trust. That's key. So it has to be someone that you trust. And the third question you want to ask yourself is, what does your gut say? So listen to your intuition. If the thought of crossing a boundary makes you feel uneasy or doubtful or confusing, it may be a sign that the boundary shouldn't be crossed. And the fourth question to think about is, what expectations were you open and honest about from the very beginning? Were you upfront about your intentions? Setting intentions early establishes boundaries up front. And the boundaries make sure that the other person feels safe and believes that you will act in his or her best interest. This is especially true if you are in a position of power, like a therapist in front of a patient. By crossing these established boundaries, you could be doing more harm than expected, which leads me to my fifth question of, is there a power differential? If so, are you maintaining the other person's trust? The sixth question is, does it affect the core of the person? If the crossing is sensitive to the other person's beliefs and personal history, then it would probably be a good idea to respect that boundary. Respecting a boundary simply means that you just don't cross it. And the last thing to consider is, are there any errors in your thinking? And this is going to be the hardest one for you to do, because the way you think about the crossing will be different than the way the other person perceives it. You might think it's acceptable, but he or she may not. You might think it's beneficial, but it may actually harm the other person. You might think it's an isolated one-time event, but it might be a repeating pattern for that other person. So it's important to remember that you are not that other person. You might have had the best intentions, thought the crossing would be beneficial, and respected the core beliefs, but it still offended the other person. In this case, you need to carefully monitor the situation, remain open and non-defensive to the offended person, and listen closely. Also, make sure that you apologize sincerely and completely. Half apologies or a non-apology may actually be worse than not apologizing at all. So do not say, "I'm sorry you feel that way." Instead, be sincere, direct, personal, and clear in your apology. So you might say, "I hurt you. I'm sorry I hurt you. What can I do to make it right?" In summary, having healthy and permeable boundaries makes us better and more empowered people. We should make every effort to respect the boundaries and to never cross or violate them. But when a crossing is necessary and beneficial to the other person, we should make every effort to respect that offended person. My own personal thoughts about this are that establishing and maintaining boundaries helps us be better people and more creative. It's the restrictions that set us free and guide us. So, for example, try composing a song or making art or writing a story where anything goes, where you have no restrictions and you can do whatever you want. For me personally, my mind goes blank and I have no idea what to do. It's incredibly hard. But when I give myself unreasonable restrictions, like not using letter P in a poem or not using the C note in the song written in the key of C, suddenly it's easier for me to do it. Because I'm forced to come up with creative solutions and it's just easier to do. It's the boundaries that help us do what we want. It's the structure that sets us free. If you found this video helpful, please hit the like button. And if you want more content like this, hit the subscribe button so that you can continue to get statistically significant support. Thank you.